In the wind-scoured silence of Cheyenne, Wyoming, a one-armed boy stood at the edge of a livestock auction, not to buy, not to speak, but to feel something again. His name was Calder Knox. 16, broken, forgotten. He traded the last piece of his old life, a scratched-up game console, for a black Mustang no one dared touch. Scarred, violent, hopeless. But what they saw as waste, Calder saw as a mirror. And what happened next silenced everyone. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The early winter winds of Cheyenne, Wyoming cut like glass. The sky above the prairie was a pale gray, washed of color, stripped of warmth, and the sun barely dared to rise over the horizon. In the distance, bare cottonwoods stood like bones against the wind. At the edge of town, where the land sagged into an old livestock lot riddled with rusted fencing and the ghosts of old rodeos, Calder Knox stood silent, one sleeve of his jacket flapping empty in the breeze. He didn't want to be here. 16 years old, Calder was tall and lean, but the accident had left him with the uneven frame of someone still adjusting to imbalance. His brown hair fell over sharp cheekbones, hiding the grayish shadows under his eyes. His left arm still bore calluses from the days he lived on adrenaline, kayaking through whitewater and Colorado rivers with his father. That was before the crash, before the river flipped him and took more than just his right arm. It took his voice. Not literally, he could speak, but his spirit had grown quiet, retreating somewhere unreachable. These days he rarely said more than a few words. Beside him, bustling through the gravel with boot heels and a scarf that trailed like a forgotten flag, was Martha Knox, his aunt. In her late 40s, Martha had the blunt energy of a woman who'd had to start over too many times. She was short, broad-shouldered, with coppery red hair tied in a frizzy bun and eyes that seemed to scan the world for trouble or opportunity. She had taken Calder in after the accident, filling her quiet ranch house with awkward silence and reheated casseroles. Today, she dragged him to the Cheyenne livestock auction with a mix of motherly hope and forced practicality. "You need to see something alive again, Cal," she had said that morning while zipping up his coat. "Not just those dead pixels on your TV." Calder didn't argue. He rarely did, but his gaze stayed fixed on the frozen mud beneath his boots, his thoughts drifting. The auction lot was loud with the shuffle of hooves and the bark of impatient ranchers. The smell of hay and oil mingled with manure and rusted tin roofs. Calder kept his distance from the crowd. They looked like shadows to him, blurred figures moving too fast. His breath fogged in front of him, and the world felt far away. Then he saw it. In the farthest corner of the pen row, past a stack of broken feed bins and an overturned wheelbarrow, stood a horse. Not just any horse, a black Mustang, gaunt to the bone, with hips that jutted like stones and a coat that looked like it hadn't been brushed in years. Long scars slashed across its flank, and one of its ears was notched. Its left eye was swollen nearly shut, pink and raw at the edge. The stallion trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, something primal. He faced the corner as if the world behind him no longer mattered. Calder's chest tightened. He stepped closer, leaving Martha behind in the main yard. The closer he got, the louder his heart seemed to beat. The stallion didn't turn. He didn't snort or bolt. He simply stood there, shaking. The auctioneer, a square-jawed man in a brown leather coat and a Denver Broncos beanie, appeared from behind a trailer. His name was Bo Malrick, known to every rancher from Rawlins to Laramie. "That one?" Bo asked with a wry chuckle, catching Calder's gaze. "Son, you don't want that one. That horse is busted up. Took him off a seizure ranch up north. Starved, whipped, panicked at his own damn shadow. He ain't no good for riding. Probably ain't good for standing neither." But Calder wasn't listening. Not really. His eyes were locked with the stallion's one good eye, deep, amber, wild. There was something in it. Pain, yes, but also a flicker of defiance, like a bullet still spinning long after it's fired. "What's his name?" Calder asked softly. Bo shrugged. "Didn't come with one. We've been calling him Glue." Calder frowned. "He's not glue." He didn't say it loud, but the words hung in the air like a vow. "You want him?" Bo raised an eyebrow. "You'd be the only one today even looking. We'll sell him off by noon, probably to a salvage house in Greeley." Calder hesitated. His mind raced. He had no money. Not really. Just the $20 his aunt gave him for lunch in a backpack slung over one shoulder. Then he felt it, the lump inside. The console, his old handheld game device. Scratched, slow, but still running. The only thing he'd kept after the accident. His last gift from his father. Slowly, Calder pulled it out and held it up to Bo. "Will you take this?" The auctioneer stared. "Or that thing?" Calder nodded. Bo scratched his beard. "Kid, you serious?" "Yes," Bo chuckled, shaking his head. "Hell, I've traded for worse. Fine. Let's say it's done." From the porch railing nearby, Grant Vexley scoffed. Calder's cousin leaned against a wooden post with his arms crossed and his smirk fully engaged. 18, tall and barrel-chested, Grant was the kind of boy who'd grown up swinging hammers and wrestling calves. His dark blonde hair was always tousled just enough to look accidental. He looked like a Marlboro ad and had the arrogance to match. Well, Grant said loud enough for everyone to hear, "if it ain't the one-armed knight rescuing a warhorse. You really are out of your mind, Cal." Calder didn't reply. He turned back to the Mustang, stepping closer to the gate. "I'll call you Buckshot," he whispered. "Because you look like hell, but I bet you still hit hard." Buckshot didn't move, but his ears flicked, just a little. Calder smiled. The wind picked up again, harsher now. Martha called out from the other end of the lot, her scarf whipping over her shoulder. Calder turned his face into the wind. He didn't feel the cold so much anymore. Something had changed. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd chosen something. Really chosen it. He looked back once more at Buckshot before walking toward the holding pen Bo directed him to. The deal was done. And just like that, two broken things had found each other. On a wind-bitten morning in Cheyenne. The Wyoming wind never really stopped. It only shifted. That morning, it came in low and steady from the south, dragging the smell of distant snow across the Cheyenne plains. Calder Knox stood outside the rickety paddock fence, his breath rising in plumes as he looked in on Buckshot. The black Mustang stood just as he had the day before, distant, rigid, scarred. But today, Calder noticed something different. The stallion wasn't hiding in the corner. He was watching. Buckshot was younger than Calder first thought, maybe 6 or 7, but life had weathered him into something older. His muscles were lean but tense, like a coiled spring never allowed to release. The scars along his flanks were jagged and long, healed without care. One, above his right shoulder, was especially deep, like a whip strike that had gone too far. His mane fell thick and unruly across his eyes, and his right ear twitched every time a dog barked or a boot scraped too hard on the gravel. But behind all that brokenness, Calder sensed fire. Not rage, resistance. Since the auction, Calder had moved his sleeping bag and tarp to the hayloft. It wasn't warm, but it was close. He spent the evenings lying on his back in the straw, reading aloud from an old copy of The Call of the Wild, or whispering stories of rivers and trails, and how sometimes when you fall, you have to build a new way to climb. He didn't expect Buckshot to listen, but he read anyway. Each morning, he sat by the fence with a book in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, letting his words hang in the cold air. He talked about the river accident in pieces, how the current pulled his kayak sideways, how the rocks took his right arm in a blink, how the worst part wasn't the pain, but waking up and seeing his father's face frozen with guilt. By the 4th day, Buckshot had stopped flinching every time Calder moved. That same morning, Clara Hollis arrived. Clara was Cheyenne's only large animal vet and had been treating ranch stock since the age of 22. Now in her early 40s, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had outlived both tragedy and small-town gossip. Tall and slender, she wore no makeup and tied her chestnut brown hair in a neat, practical bun. Her jeans were always dusty. Her hands always smelled faintly of iodine and hay, and her eyes, gray-blue, sharp, missed nothing. She had a reputation for being blunt but fair, respected by ranchers, feared slightly by farmhands, and loved deeply by the animals she treated. She parked her red truck beside the barn and stepped out with her usual clipboard, calling out, "Martha, you said the heifer was limping again." Martha waved from the kitchen window, but Calder was already walking toward Clara. He said nothing, just gestured toward the paddock where Buckshot stood. Clara followed him with a raised brow, her boots crunching over frozen mud. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the Mustang. "His name's Buckshot," Calder said, softly. Clara took her time. She approached the fence without stepping inside, her gaze sweeping from the horse's stiff posture to the old scars. "You pull him from the auction?" Calder nodded. She gave him a long look. "You know he's been whipped, right?" "That a lot. Horses like that don't just come around. Most of them never do." "I'm not asking him to come around," Calder murmured, "just to stay." Clara tilted her head. Then she did something unexpected. She crouched beside the fence, lowered her clipboard, and sat cross-legged in the dirt. "I'll stay too," she said, "for a bit. Let's see what your boy thinks." They sat in silence for 10 minutes. Buckshot stared back but didn't bolt. Eventually, Clara stood and dusted her jeans. "You're doing something right," she said, "but don't think quiet means safe. He's still got fire in him." "He's allowed to," Calder replied. As Clara packed up to leave, she gave Calder a long, evaluating look. "If you're going to keep working with him, I'll come by every few days, not just to check his health. I want to see where this goes." Back at the house, Martha leaned against the screen door, arms crossed. Her face was drawn but curious. "He's still not letting you near, is he?" Calder shook his head. She exhaled through her nose. "And you're still sleeping in the barn?" He nodded. Martha looked past him to where Buckshot stood. "You used to stare at your bedroom ceiling for hours, Cal. Now you're up before me and reading to a horse that looks like it crawled out of a nightmare. I don't get it. But I don't hate it either." Then she turned and walked back inside. That night, Calder stayed in the hayloft again. The stars blinked faintly through the wooden slats above. The wind creaked the beams, but the barn felt like a kind of sanctuary, imperfect but honest. He reread the same page 3 times before giving up. Instead, he whispered, "I don't need you to be fixed, just not afraid of me." Down below in the dim pen, Buckshot stirred. The next morning, Calder brought a red apple and sat beside the gate. He didn't offer it, just placed it near the fence post and waited. Buckshot didn't move, but when Calder returned hours later, the apple was gone. It wasn't progress most people could see, but to Calder, it was a beginning. The sky above Cheyenne had been sulking all day. By late afternoon, it darkened into something sullen and angry, layered with bruised clouds that threatened more than just snow. Calder Knox stood at the edge of the paddock, watching Buckshot paw at the frozen ground. The air had shifted, still heavy, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Even the prairie dogs had vanished. Clara Hollis had stopped by that morning. She leaned against the fence post, arms crossed over her long frame. Clara always wore her same worn denim jacket with the elbows patched in dark corduroy. Her sharp eyes scanned Buckshot with the same quiet intensity as she did all creatures. No judgment, just a measuring of pain. "He's pacing more today," she noted. Calder nodded. "He doesn't like the sky." "Most animals don't," Clara said, rubbing the bridge of her nose with 2 calloused fingers. "Storms press down on them, like ghosts in the air." She glanced over at Calder. "You staying in the barn tonight?" He nodded again. "Good." She hesitated. "You've built something with him. Storms can break trust fast. If he panics, he's not going to remember what you've said to him. He'll remember the hands that hurt him." She walked back to her truck, then turned, her voice softer. "You just make sure he doesn't have to remember alone." By sundown, the first grumbles of thunder rolled low across the fields like distant drums. Martha came out to the porch, her arms wrapped in a wool blanket. "You sure you want to stay out there?" Calder slung his bag over his shoulder. "He needs someone." She didn't argue. The wind rose quickly, scattering dry leaves in spirals. Calder reached the barn just as the rain began to fall, heavy and cold, slicing the air in diagonal sheets. The tin roof rattled. Buckshot whinnied, a sharp, panicked sound. Calder moved fast, crossing the tack room, grabbing the old oil lantern and lighting it. The flame fluttered weakly in the draft, then the thunder cracked. It was the kind of sound that makes even solid things feel thin. Calder heard wood snap. A shriek of hooves followed. He bolted toward the paddock. Buckshot had kicked through the gate, splintering one of the posts. His body was a blur of movement, circling the open yard in terror. Lightning flashed overhead, outlining his wild form in silver. His coat shimmered with rain, muscles bunching and releasing as he galloped from nothing to nowhere. Calder's heart pounded. The mud sucked at his boots as he ran. "Buckshot," he shouted, but the wind tore the word from his lips. He could see it in the stallion's eyes, white-rimmed, blind with fear. The horse wasn't here anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere awful. Calder didn't stop. He ran straight into the storm. The rain stung his face. The air tasted like electricity. Another boom of thunder cracked the sky, and Buckshot reared. Calder flung himself sideways, rolling in the mud to avoid being trampled. He coughed, spat mud, and stood again. "Hey!" he called, softer now. "I'm here." Buckshot circled again, hooves slamming into soaked earth. "I know what it's like," Calder said, stepping closer. A gust of wind threw water in his face, but he didn't flinch. He reached out, fingers trembling, palm open. "I know what it's like to hate loud things, to feel like the world's going to collapse." He took another step. "You don't have to run from it." Buckshot's gallop slowed, only slightly, but enough for Calder to close the distance. "I'm not them. I won't hit you. I won't leave you." He moved in closer, breath shallow. Buckshot snorted, water flying from his nostrils. Then the stallion froze, sides heaving, ears pinned, but no longer running. Calder touched him. His palm landed on Buckshot's rain-slicked shoulder, firm and steady. The horse shuddered and stayed. Lightning forked across the sky. Thunder followed, but Buckshot didn't bolt. He trembled beneath Calder's hand, and Calder, soaked to the bone, leaned his forehead against the animal's neck. They stood like that for what felt like hours. No words, no movement, just the sound of breath and rain, two broken things weathering the same storm. Later, long after the worst had passed, Calder led Buckshot back to the barn. He dried the horse with an old wool blanket, whispering nothing in particular, just soft sounds, reminders that he was still there. Buckshot didn't flinch. He didn't resist. As the storm cleared, Calder looked through the open barn door. A full moon had broken through the clouds. Its pale light spilled across the soaked earth. He turned to Buckshot. "You stayed." Buckshot's head lowered, resting lightly against Calder's shoulder. The snow had stopped falling 2 days ago, but patches of white still clung to the corners of the paddock like forgotten memories. The wind was quieter now, as though Cheyenne itself was holding its breath. Calder Knox stood in the center of the yard, facing a makeshift hurdle fashioned from 2 hay bales and an old fence rail. It was crooked, uneven, and barely held together with baling twine. But it was more than just wood and rope. It was a test. Across from him leaned Grant Vexley, arms crossed, boots kicked out in the mud, that signature smirk tugging at the side of his mouth. His wool coat was unzipped despite the cold, revealing a t-shirt with the name of a demolition derby stitched across the front. Grant was always trying to look unbothered, but there was tension in his jaw today. "You really think that busted-up nag can jump?" Grant asked, flicking a toothpick between his fingers. "You've been reading too many Disney books, Cal." Calder didn't answer. He held the lead rope lightly in his one hand, feeling Buckshot's breath move against the cold air behind him. The stallion's muscles quivered, not from fear this time, but from anticipation. "Here's the deal," Grant said, stepping closer. "If he can't make it over that rail today, he goes to Carlson's lot. You don't get to keep a liability just because you feel sorry for it." Carlson's lot wasn't just a euphemism. It was a known holding place outside of town, an unofficial stopover for horses on their way to slaughterhouses out east. Calder had seen it once. That memory was enough. "Deal," Calder said quietly. Grant chuckled. "Didn't think you had the guts." He turned and strode toward the porch, where Martha Knox stood sipping coffee, her face unreadable. Her eyes followed Calder, but she didn't speak. Her support had turned silent, watchful. Training Buckshot had not come easy. In the 2 weeks since the storm, Calder had worked every morning and every fading light with the horse. No saddles, no spurs, just repetition, trust, and long hours of walking side by side until Buckshot no longer flinched at sudden sounds or movements. Calder had used voice and rhythm, clicks of the tongue, whispered commands, slight shifts in pressure on the lead rope. When Buckshot panicked, Calder stopped. When the stallion advanced, Calder praised. The relationship wasn't built on force, it was built on patience. This morning, they stood side by side in front of the rail. Buckshot's ears were forward, alert. His coat had regained its shine, a deep black that shimmered blue in the light. The scars were still there, but they looked like part of him now, testament, not weakness. Calder inhaled deeply and stepped forward. Buckshot followed, hesitant at first, hooves crunching on frost-bitten dirt. Behind them, another truck pulled up the drive, its tires grinding gravel. A tall woman stepped out, tucking a folder under one arm. Sarah Bellamy, the county equine therapist, was a name Calder had only heard mentioned in passing. She was in her early 30s, tall and willow-thin, with espresso-colored skin and dark, coiled hair pulled into a low bun. Dressed in a sleek fleece jacket and worn riding boots, she had the calm posture of someone used to unpredictable animals and people. A gentle accident years ago had left her with a slight limp, which she never tried to hide. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the tone of someone who expected to be listened to. She approached Clara Hollis, who was already standing near the paddock gate. Clara offered a nod. "Told you he was different," she said simply. Sarah watched Calder and Buckshot with measured interest. "Different doesn't mean ready." "No," Clara said, "but it means worth watching." Back at the rail, Calder halted. Buckshot paused, ears flicking. Calder clicked his tongue twice and tapped the lead rope gently. "Come on, boy," he whispered. "Just try." Buckshot stepped forward, then stopped, his eyes locked on the rail, a hesitation. The stallion sniffed, blew through his nostrils, and shifted weight. Calder's heart thudded. He didn't push, he waited. Buckshot backed up, half a step, then two. Calder's stomach dropped. Grant leaned forward from the porch, smirking. But then the Mustang tossed his head as if battling something internal, and surged forward. The jump wasn't elegant. It was raw, chaotic. His front hooves cleared, his back legs brushed the rail. The whole thing rattled and collapsed in a pile. But they had done it. Buckshot landed, stumbled, then straightened. Calder let out a shaky breath, unable to move. Clara clapped once, short and sharp. Sarah narrowed her eyes, studying the boy and the horse. "That wasn't bad," she said. Grant stood frozen, mouth half open. "Looks like he made it," Martha said from the porch, her voice dry but laced with pride. Grant scoffed and turned away without a word. Sarah approached the paddock. "Calder, right?" she asked. He nodded, brushing mud off his jeans. "I'm Sarah Bellamy. I run the equine therapy program up in Laramie. Clara's told me about you." Calder glanced toward Clara, who gave a slow nod. "That wasn't just luck," Sarah continued. "You've got a gift, not just with horses, but with damaged ones. That's rare." Calder said nothing. His cheeks flushed. "If you're open to it," Sarah said, "I'd like to sponsor your enrollment in our apprentice program. It's part-time, flexible. You can learn proper therapy techniques, how to work with trauma cases. You'd be working with horses like Buckshot, and maybe help other kids like you too." Calder blinked. He hadn't expected any of this. "I don't need an answer today," Sarah added, handing him a business card. "But think about it. It's not just about jumping hurdles, it's about healing through them." She nodded to Clara and turned toward her truck. Buckshot leaned into Calder's shoulder, gently, as if to steady them both. The golden hour stretched long across the Cheyenne plain, casting copper light over the open fields that rippled like silk under the wind. It was late afternoon, the kind of Wyoming sky that felt almost mythical. So wide it swallowed the horizon, so blue it seemed untouchable. The last of the snow had melted, and the ground was dry, earthy, and soft beneath hoof and boot alike. Calder Knox stood beside Buckshot, one hand on the Mustang's strong neck, the other adjusting the reins. His breath was steady. The saddle, an old, well-oiled one Clara had brought from her clinic, rested snugly on Buckshot's back. The stallion had accepted it without resistance after a week of gentle groundwork and endless patience. His coat gleamed under the sun, black with threads of chestnut along his flanks where his winter coat was shedding. The scars were still there, but like Calder's missing arm, they no longer defined who they were. They were simply part of the story. Calder wore a riding vest stitched by Martha herself, modified to hold gear on his left side. His posture was no longer tentative. He sat tall, not perfectly balanced, but upright and self-possessed. With a single movement, he placed his foot in the stirrup and swung himself up. It wasn't graceful. He had to twist, to lean harder to compensate for what was missing, but he didn't need help. Buckshot didn't spook. He stood still as stone. From the edge of the paddock, Clara Hollis watched with her arms crossed, her faded baseball cap pulled low to block the light. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes, for once, were soft. She was proud, and more than that, relieved. She'd seen too many horses go to ruin and too many kids give up before they found themselves. Calder and Buckshot had rewritten both fates. Standing next to her was Sarah Bellamy, clipboard in hand but eyes firmly on the field. She had returned that morning to follow up on her offer. Her fleece jacket was zipped against the wind, and her calm, limping gait didn't slow her as she moved alongside the fence line, speaking in low tones with Clara. She had the steady nature of someone who'd found purpose the hard way, by losing it first. Years ago, an accident during a backcountry trail ride left her pinned beneath a collapsed gelding. A shattered knee and months of recovery gave her the fire that now lived behind her thoughtful eyes. Since then, she had worked not only with horses but with combat veterans, children with trauma, and the forgotten in between. To her, healing was a language spoken without words, and watching Calder and Buckshot today was like hearing it sung. Calder gave a gentle nudge with his knee. Buckshot stepped forward, slow and measured. The first few paces were unsure, but with each step, something settled. They moved through the gate and into the open field beyond, where the fences stopped and the wind had no master. And then, in a single breath, Buckshot took off. Not wild, not frightened, but with intent. His hooves found rhythm, and Calder leaned forward, gripping with his thighs, his balance finding harmony with the horse beneath him. They didn't fly, they flowed. The field swallowed them like a tide, the wind pulling at Calder's hair, Buckshot's mane lashing behind like a battle flag. The sound of hooves pounded steady as a heartbeat. The wind wasn't cold, it was electric, alive. Calder laughed, really laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. The freedom didn't come from the speed or the motion, but from the fact that no one was watching him with pity. He wasn't the boy with one arm. He wasn't a tragedy. He was a rider. Buckshot slowed as they reached the far end of the pasture, the sun now casting long copper shadows. Calder let him trot, then finally walk. He reached forward, rubbed the stallion's neck. "You did it," he whispered. They stood there in the silence, the wind rolling over the hills like distant waves. Calder closed his eyes and just breathed. When they returned to the paddock, Clara stepped forward and held Buckshot's halter as Calder dismounted. Sarah followed, pulling a small folder from her pack. "There's something you should see," she said, handing Calder a form. "What is it?" he asked, flipping it open. "A letter of acceptance," Sarah replied, "to our advanced equinetherapy apprenticeship in Oregon." Calder looked up, startled. "Oregon?" Sarah smiled. "It's not mandatory, but I spoke with Clara. She believes you're ready, and I agree. The center's in a quiet valley outside Eugene. We work with rescue horses and trauma patients, veterans, children, the elderly. You'd be training not just for your sake, but to help others." Calder's fingers tightened on the paper. "You really think I can do this?" Sarah's eyes held no hesitation. "You already are." From behind them, footsteps approached. Grant Vexley stood at the gate, not leaning, not sneering, just standing. His coat was zipped for once, his cap low over his brow. He didn't say anything, just watched the scene in silence. Calder turned to him slowly. There was no anger in his face, no challenge. And for the first time, Grant didn't mock. He gave a slow, reluctant nod, half a gesture but heavy with something Calder hadn't seen before. Respect. Calder didn't need words. He didn't need an apology. Not anymore. Because he had something better, a bond that couldn't be taken, a future that had been earned, and a horse that had once been called worthless, galloping like thunder beneath him. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Calder turned back to Buckshot. "What do you think?" he whispered. "You ready for Oregon?" Buckshot nickered, low and steady, and Calder smiled. Life doesn't wait for us to be whole to begin again. Calder's journey reminds us that healing isn't about erasing what hurt us. It's about learning to live forward with it. Like Buckshot, many of us carry scars. Some visible, some buried deep. But those scars don't make us broken, they make us real. With patience, trust, and the courage to take just one step at a time, we can rebuild what we thought was lost. In daily life, maybe you're facing something that feels impossible: grief, failure, loneliness, or the weight of starting over. But remember, even the smallest acts of belief in yourself, in someone else, can lead to transformation. Sometimes healing doesn't gallop. Sometimes it just walks beside you quietly, waiting. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need it. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of hope and second chances. Your support helps keep these voices alive.